All right, so when we talk about mimetic engineering, so if a meme is transmitted through any cultural mode of communication, and memes combine to form viral ideas, which can mutate over time given diverse environments, mimetic engineering is taking healthy memes, splicing them onto a disabled lethal meme, and injecting them into a host where they can replicate. So the medical application of this is taking anti-cystic fibrosis gene. Cystic fibrosis is a disease that infects healthy lung tissue. And you take an anti-cystic fibrosis gene, you graft it onto a disabled cold virus. That is, you take a cold virus. See, cold viruses are lung specific. They're going to the lungs anyway. And that virus basically that infects the lungs, causing your cold condition. Well, you disable the cold virus so it's no longer able to make disease, but you retain the part that's going to target lung tissue in particular, and then you're delivering that particular medicine. So if we look at then mimetic engineering from a social context, you understand where the original mimetic core of the gang came from and the survival conditions that the gang originally involved in, how it's morphed and mutated, and then you redirect gang activity using pro-social memes. That's the basic, simple concept. In order to deliver this, you need people who are medically trained in the sense that they can see, okay, I need to give you the science. I also need to understand your culture. I also need to understand your values of what you need to get in terms of meeting your needs in a pro-social way. So this means like medically trained, culturally competent social workers, which are not the police. Because the police as a military organization is basically oriented towards suppression. Their thing is not social service. They may have athletic leagues and stuff like that, but that by itself is not social service by itself. It's admirable, but they're not structured as an organization to pull that off, right? So, basically redirecting gang activity, right? So when you look at then LA Crips and Bloods as the original meme, then we see how since memes themselves are transmitted through any cultural mode, one of the things that we've seen is that in Indian country, where there's no contact with urban black people at all, even in rural areas, like Warm Springs, like the Navajo Res, you will see kids acting out, quote unquote, black style gang behavior with no contact with black people. In Tonga and Samoa, you also find Tongan Crips and Bloods, right? Again, not an urban environment, but the meme has spread partially because the traditional culture that would have protected Tongan and Samoan youth from getting into Crips, basically getting into gang activity, had been destroyed under the process of assimilation. See how all this fills together? So basically, for example, in New Zealand, one of the things they used to do was rites of passage. And one of the things that they found under the pressure of assimilation is they stopped doing traditional rites of passage, and what they saw is that they started having gang activity, where the youth started organizing into street gangs, even though it's not necessarily an urban environment. And partially, they've begun to reestablish rites of passage, but that's why at Lane we created rites of passage as an intervention, not necessarily with gang-related youth, but also to prevent gang-related youth from forming by basically having them meet their cultural needs and cultural identity needs in a pro-social way. So, memes combined. So you also found this Eugene and Omaha, and the reason I basically talked about Omaha is when Time magazine, so memes are spread through media, right? So Time magazine basically did a cover where they had a white kid who Eugene police and Omaha police would refer to as a wannabe. That is, you have a white kid wearing a baseball cap, white t-shirt with a sawed-off shotgun, and that's the cover of Time magazine. Okay, and they refer to this person as a gunslinger. So in the entire 7-page article, it's a gunslinger. The white kids are gunslingers. In the entire 7-page article, laughing to keep from crying, the word gang is mentioned once. It's a night scene. The police are interrogating gang members, and they're all kids of color. So the only time the word gang is used is with this black kid, mixed-race black kid, an Indian kid, and a Latino kid being interrogated at night by the police. Police interrogate gang members on the street. All the other parts of the article where they're referring to white youth listening to rap music, drinking 40s, and doing drive-by shootings. So some police sources have basically said, oh, well, it's not about race, it's not about, whether you're wearing your colors, it's about behavior. Okay, well, if it's about behavior, why are the white kids called wannabes and the black kids called gang members? You seem to have a little cognitive dissonance there. There's still a little bit of racism there. And that's what even these white kids are basically reacting to. They're not wannabes. They think they're serious. They are committing crimes, as you've noticed. They're getting jumped in, blood out, in terms of the gang initiation. They're basically following rites of passage. So one of the things that we know from anthropology is that the need for rites of passage is so ingrained within human culture that if you don't have them, kids will initiate themselves. And basically, rites of passage have tests of skill and intelligence, tests of danger, and basically organizing around common group values against a larger society. Right? So that need is so prominent that if you don't have formalized rites of passage within your culture, people will initiate themselves to organize to meet their needs, especially if society is not meeting their needs. So we either reorganize society or we find a different meme for these folks to organize around. And who would be responsible for delivering that, and who is best suited to deliver that? Certainly our Lane Rites of Passage program is not designed to deal with the intensive needs of what are referred to by the system as high-risk youth. But there are elements that could be used to do that. Right? So, going back to slides, so LA Crips and Bloods, Eugene and Omaha. So the Time magazine article was talking about Omaha gang-related Crips and Bloods that are white kids, but they're called wannabes and gunslingers. Tongan, Samoan, Crips and Bloods, basically an island environment as opposed to so I'm basically just saying there was no literature before I started applying this to explain why this is happening. So, but I was looking at the solutions. So the viral idea. So each one of those, the viral idea is that entire construct up there. A meme is an individual idea or thought. So for example, you can have memes for respect, juice, nation building. So respect is, what is respect? How do you give respect? How do you gain respect? How do you lose respect? How are you disrespected? How do you show respect? Respect is a construct which within the gang it means fear, ruling by fear and domination, and the threat of violence. Well, that's one way of getting respect. Juice is power and information. Nation building. So if you take those memes and you basically explode them, that is, you expand them and see where they're coming from and where they can morph by doing mimetic engineering, by creating a pro-social meme to replace what the activity is. So nation building, that was one father, one single father, fathering multiple children with multiple women because they weren't expecting to live, which was reasonable expectation. If you're a gang member, you might die. You might die young. So you want your seed, you want to spread your seed around to ensure that your genetic line goes on, right? And they referred to this as nation building, right? So go back to slide. So nation building, we replace that meme with safer sex, which could mean let's know the HIV status, the infection status of your partner, have a stable relationship, have a job to support your children, be around to support your children and help build the nation. So that means you also have to look at your addiction, your alcohol and drug use. Look at condom use, that is birth control. Basically, you develop communication skills. Look at HIV infection protocols. So safer sex, safe sex is using protection. Safer sex is knowing the infection status of your partner and basically using protection each and every time, and also raising, learning parenting skills, et cetera, and being able to respond as a mature, responsible adult with a long-term vision. You're building a nation and you are present with the seeds of the future, your children, to help them build it, rather than just spreading your seeds around and hope they grow by the mom who may or may. No, nation building is you're building this nation together. And we're talking about a healthy African American construct. Juice. Say juice is power and information. The ability to have patience, the ability to innovate, the ability to be bold, to act through your fear, having connections, being able to articulate not only verbally, but also have different components of technology or your ability to leverage, for example, different forms of power into different spheres. Respect, knowledge of history, knowledge of the health of the community, knowledge of yourself, basically having self-respect, being able to actualize yourself, having a sense of a bright and promising future, basically the continuum of force question. So I'm borrowing a meme from law enforcement here. So the idea is a continuum of force. So basically verbal commands to guns, lethal force, and then all the tools that you have in between, getting increasingly more lethal up to, lethal weapons, words, holds, chemical weapons, tasers, guns, et cetera, continuum of force. And you only go up the ladder depending on the situation. So that there's a continuum of force, and that you are trained and you have memes for the use of particular weapons and an ethic around particular weapons. So for example, you'll have a code of honor. So for example, in ancient times, say in feudal Japan, you had samurais. Now, you couldn't buy a samurai sword as a consumer choice. You had to earn your sword through rigorous training. What if we applied that code to guns? You can't acquire a gun until, let's say you have first aid training. You can't take a life until you can save a life. And you can demonstrate that you're not going to take a life until you exhaust all the options before lethal force. You don't just go to lethal force, and you don't just buy a gun at Burger King for $35. Stolen gun. Right? I'm talking about a real event that happened in Eugene. Maybe happens in Eugene. Right? So you replace that meme, that respect meme, not fear, respect because I got a gun, but respect because I have knowledge, I'm deep, I'm wise. I respect myself, I respect you, I respect my community, even if I'm being disrespected, because I have a bright and promising future, and I have a code of honor. So the idea of basically diffusing gangs, this is not new. This is actually the techniques that have worked, that have been replicated within my community, having been around using this with individual gang members, and then in terms of looking at collective gang members and deciding, who's a gang and what is a gang and all those different things. So mimetic engineering, right? So part of the idea then, so in order to inject pro-social memes into the gangs, you have to be culturally proficient. That means you have to understand the culture of the gang and the gang's use of technology, and also be able to have the gangs actually be able to meet their needs in a pro-social way. So cultural proficiency means being able to take artifacts from one culture and transfer them to another successfully. Now, if you can't do this, if you don't have the means to do it, that means the thought processes or even the belief system that it exists. Typically, military organizations, so for example, police can be culturally proficient, and the reason I keep mentioning police is that seems to be our mode of choice of dealing with gangs. Military containment, suppression, put them in jail. We're not going to address the racism that they're reacting to. In fact, we're not even going to address racism at all. We're not even going to pretend, you're going to pretend it doesn't exist or that we don't have it. It's not necessarily, how's that working for you? Yeah, thought so. So, cultural proficiency means being able to take artifacts from one culture and transfer them to another. So, when we talk about axiology and the crossroads, so what I've done here is basically mimetically take two images. The inner circle, even though the whole thing looks like it's from a gun sight, what I'm combining is Native American four directions construct with the African American or the African crossroads construct. And so axiology of the crossroads is what this slide is labeled. And so basically the idea, the inner circle is the invisible world that people cannot see inside of a culture, that only cultural insiders know and talk about, and may or may not talk about with people outside the culture. So that they will have an invisible world that might not be visible except as if you're a cultural insider. So for example, if you're a woman and you've gone beyond puberty, you know about premenstrual syndrome, PMS, right? You know about PMS. But men don't know about PMS because they don't have a menstrual cycle. Is PMS real? Or is it just PMS putting up with men's shit? It's both, right? But men don't may acknowledge PMS, but they don't know what it's like. I can witness a birth, and I've witnessed the birth of my children and my grandchild, but I don't know what it is to be in labor. So part of the piece then is that there's an invisible world that generates the ideas and the worldview of the culture. It's archetypes. Okay? Then the outer circles are basically what the world sees. And that's naturally smaller. So the inner circle generates the cultural experience and the archetypes within the culture. The outer circle is outward behavior that people can see and then make their own conclusions about. That's stereotypes. So archetypes are inside the culture, they're emic. Stereotypes are from outside of the culture, they're etic. Anthropology was the science of white people studying other cultures without studying themselves. And basically saying that, oh, my personal prejudices of superiority are normal, y'all are inferior. So you need to assimilate, erase your native culture, and become like us, because we're clearly superior. So that's one particular axiology. So the axiology is made up of not only the core values, which we talked about in the slide earlier. So Euro-American, the highest value is control, acquisition and control of the object. African American is the highest value is the relationship. The Asian value is the highest value is the cohesion of the group, and Native American is the relationship between all beings, all in theos. So an axiology in Nichols' construct comprises at least these four things. So going clockwise, starting at 10 o'clock, the core value, the logic system. So logic is a means of reasoning to an answer. The answer doesn't have to be true, it just has to be consistent with the logic. There's a process. Process is how you apply your technology, where technology is a study of technique. not literally just machines, but also there's hard and soft technology. So there's technology like machines, technology that you can touch, and techniques, a way of doing things. So soft technology, the ideas, a way of doing things, the recipe. Technology could be how you cook, what implements you use. The soft technology is the recipe, how you combine them in what order. Epistemology is the way of knowing the world, how you know the world. So you have the invisible world that generates the culture, and then the visible world that other people can see. That's combining the crossroads and Native American medicine wheel. And I'm doing that because I'm a black Indian. So I see the world at least in those two ways, from the Native point of view and from the African point of view. And my 164th Irish from great-great-great-grandfather Keller, I listen to on occasion by speaking this language. So, as an example, this is part of the medicine wheel construct. It's Lakota. You can tell it's Lakota from the 4 colors. So it's among the Lakota and also the Salagi, who you know by the French corruption of their name Cherokee. They both have this construct of, in the beginning, Creator created 4 races, one for each of the 4 directions. In the east is the yellow race, because east is where the sun comes from. So that's Asians. In the south, going sunwise, is the black race, south from Africa. So when the Taino referred to Columbus, they said, talking about the gold spear points, they said, we got this gold from these black guys from south across the water. Now, other Native Americans, of course, had gold technology, notably the Incas. So it's not that natives didn't know what gold was or where it was, but Chris was looking for gold. So south is the black race, west is the red race, and north is the white race. So the idea with this construct is that no race is superior, but each race is necessary. And so in our racial construct in America, where we don't follow this particular model, we have Hispanics. Well, what are Hispanics? Well, Hispanics from this native model would be a combination of all 4 of those races. Asian Pacific Islanders. Why Asian Pacific Islanders? Because some Asian Pacific Islanders are a combination of black people and Asians as well as Caucasians. I've met Native Hawaiians with afros out to here who, if they didn't speak, I would swear they were from South Central. You also see that with Tongans and Samoans. You also see that with Thai people. Dark color, broad nose, thick lips. I'm not saying that Africa is the only place you get those, but we have been there. So, the idea then, 4 directions, 4 races. In the west, red, Tulipit Wapakisinip, long-reaching land, Turtle Island, North, Central, and South America. The south, Alkebulan, Africa, land of the blacks. North, white, Europa. East, yellow, Asia. So 4 directions, 4 races. So within this construct then, if we started with Native Americans, then you could basically develop a whole axiology combining core value, logic, process, and epistemology. What's generating that from the invisible world, and what's generating that, how does that manifest in the visible world? So when you ask then, who are you? Essential question. It's not a philosophical question. Who are you? And how do you know who you are? What or who is the one doing the knowing? Which self is that? From where did and does it arise? Who is that does the knowing? How do you know who you are? Who defines who you are? Where did that definition come from? Now, we saw last week when we were talking about the definitions that are generated by the White Dictionary, what their definition of man was, and what their definition of woman was, what their definition of black was, and what their definition of white was, and what's positive and what's negative. Who is doing that defining? So what should we do? Should we define the dictionary differently? We'd still have the old cultural baggage from, the hundreds of years that has been, the definitions of the dictionary, because those things did not just come, within the last 20th century. And when we talk about the meme of the dictionary and we say Webster's, well, Noah Webster in the 1700s created the dictionary, at least that's the history. What were they thinking? What were the constructs of races? The reason you saw Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Negroid in that dictionary is that's a holdover from the 1700s, that was the racial point of view. So who are you and who does the defining? Are you African American? Are you Negro? Are you colored? Are you white? What does white mean? What does Hispanic mean? Who does the defining? What or who is the one doing the knowing? How do you find yourself? How did you find yourself? What is your story? Your narrative, your history, your memory, your fiction, your myth, your voice, your song, your rhythm, your drum, your path, your vision, your vocation, your dream. Now, if your culture doesn't ask or answer those questions, then, and it doesn't provide, if your emic culture doesn't give you those answers, then either you feel a void or those memes will be supplied for you by a dominant culture. So, what is your story? Is the story, and your narrative, okay? What is the story that you tell yourself? Where did you come from? It's almost like your autobiography, but you're the one telling the tale. Is there more to the story than what you know? You probably agree that it is. But where do you get that story? What's your history? What's your memory? History for a people is like memory for a person. It forms part of their identity. If you have a brain injury and experience amnesia, well, that's considered partially a mental illness, and it's not considered a normal concept or normal psychology. So in order to have a normal psychology as a people, you have to have a history that is your own, not one that's constructed for you. So being able to answer these different questions, your story, your narrative, your history, your memory, your fiction, what are the lies you tell yourself? What are the fairy tales you tell yourself? Are those real? Or are you acting them out as if they're real? What is your myth? So is it a story you tell yourself? Or is it an archetype that you're acting out? What is your voice, your song, your rhythm, your drum, your path, your vision, your vocation, your dream? How do you answer those questions, right? Who are your peeps, your homies, your chai? Chai, not the drink. This is from Mid-Turtle Island. It basically means the other half of me. You, the other half of me. Okay, diunitologic, quadriunitologic within a Native American population. So chai is both singular and plural. Where are you coming from? Where are you at? Where are you going? These are all part of your identity. So these are all answerable. I have answered. You could use these in a reaction paper if you wanted. Your story, your narrative, your peeps, where are you coming from, where are you at, where are you going? What's your homeland, your origins, and your ultimate destination? However that works out. So these are all going into an identity, and for example, if we're talking in the context of gang-related behavior, people have answers for these. or attempt to answer these through their behavior and through their worldview. So who are you? Who determines the answers, the questions you can ask, and the logic by which you determine the validity of what you know and feel? You've got to ask that question. Who does that? Who decides where and what you get to do wherever? Who decides that? What's inside the box that you think inside or out of? When they talk about thinking, the meme of thinking outside the box. Is there a box? Is there Botox within it? A little or a lot? Now, I'm using my poetic license to make a larger point. Inside the box, is it toxic? Botox is produced by botulism, which is an organism that lives without oxygen and generates a toxin around it. Just like penicillin is the toxin from a mold that inhibits other molds from growing on bread. So some creatures use their waste products to keep other creatures from getting in. Okay? So within the box of white supremacy, it creates an environment in which anything non-white cannot flourish. Right? And the toxins are often invisible. So that's why I'm asking, is there a box you're in? And is there Botox within it? Something that seems to be naturally occurring toxin that is affecting you. Keeping you from growing, keeping you from being animated. Is there a little of that toxin or a lot? Okay? So within the framework that you operate in and which you use for your identity, are there some toxic memes within that? A little toxic meme or a lot? You got to ask that question. So how toxic is the box? So an axiology helps you examine, or even whether you examine. So either helps you examine or even determines whether you examine. It helps you empower, that is power, and it helps you empower or dominate. So an axiology, that is a worldview, and that's why I'm spending so much time on this and have expanded it, as you've noticed if you've taken the class from the beginning, going more in detail as we work with the construct. Helps you examine, or even whether you examine. So you won't examine if you don't question your reality. If you don't even have a context to question your reality, you won't do it. This is why it's stereotypical of black people, that is, other people observing our behavior, that we always talk about racism. Oh, you guys are delusional for believing in racism. No, we just question reality, especially if it seems like there is something wrong here. And that's an African trait, and it's not just Africans that do it, but those of us who came out of an African culture, for example, stereotypically Jewish people, are always about asking questions. Jews were us. In Africa, there were no European Jews before the 7th century. So they got that whole thing about asking questions because that's what we do. And teaching in parables and teaching in stories. That's why Yeshua did what he did, because nothing he did was not contained within Judaic culture. Everything that Christianity evolved out of that particular culture with his particular flourishes. All right? So, liberation theology comes out of an African construct where, no, Yeshua doesn't want you to be saved. Yeshua wants you to be free. And you have to free yourself. And one of the primary things you have to do in freeing yourself is loving your enemy, not turning the other cheek. That's what the Romans want you to do. No, he wants you to see inside your enemy's heart by seeing inside your own first. Knowing what makes you tick. Knowing where you're stuck. You can't help your enemy out if you're stuck in the same way that your enemy is. Right? So, Liberation empowers you rather than power over causing fear or dominate. You got to accept Jesus as your personal savior or else you go to hell. Wait, first of all, his name ain't Jesus. Second of all, he didn't believe in hell because Jews of his time, from his time and today, don't believe in a hell or a devil. So where'd you get that? Oh, scripture. Who's scripture? Scripture written by who? Because that's not in the original construct. Empower or dominate. Liberate or save. Which should I do? So, either or, both and. Okay, these are logic systems. Either, both, and. Okay, that's a diunital logic system. Quadriunital logic system. Or a triunital logic system there as well. Nete, that's Sanskrit, it believes this, not that. Or not that, this. So, crossroads. Core value, logic, epistemology, process. Core value, I feel. What is it I feel? What is it that I feel is important? Acquiring objects, he who has the most toys wins, or having rich relationships? Do I feel that the highest value is not what I have individually, but what the group needs? Is the core value what I feel the right relationship between not only the people of the four directions, but people of the invisible world and two-leggeds, those with wings, those that swim in the sea, the rock people, the winds, having a right relationship with those things? Epistemology, I know. How do I know the world? What's the means through which I know the world? Logic, I reason. How do I think? What is it I think about? And the process, I do, I be. What is it I do and how do I be? We be doing it? What do we be doing? So, native, for example. Native, African, Asian, and European. So to run that by, since we're running this in real time, right? Axiology is the basic construct and where the crossroads come together, starting with native, then African, Asian, and European. Now, if you understand the basic the core values, the logic system, the epistemology, and the processes of each one of those, one of the things you can learn to detect is where they intersect. So an axiology encompasses, so the axiology is basically the highest value is those value statements. An axiology also encompasses the view of time and how that view of time affects behavior. An epistemology, how you know the world and what is true. A logic, a way of reasoning to an answer. A process, how you act in the world as a result of your axiology. And a technology, literally a way of doing things, hard technologies and soft technologies. So axiology encompasses all of those aspects, those separate things. So it can mean singularly the highest value is, but it can also mean that highest value statement plus your view of time, epistemology, and process, and your logic system within a culture. And then how those things change. Right? So, in a culture's axiology, all these things interact simultaneously. Now, one of the challenges with this construct, which Nichols couldn't build in, because obviously, as you've seen, this is really complicated to begin with. And he's already simplifying it, because when you think about reducing 7 billion people on the planet to 4 axiologies, the reductionist model is going to have some problems. And then there's been so much interaction and assimilation and cultural domination that maybe the original axiology doesn't exist, or nor would it be recognized. His idea is that it is transmitted through the genetic code, these axiological core values, but culturation changes that, and assimilation changes that, and socialization changes that. So the basics. Study the philosophical basis of a given culture's value. So if we look at other English words, the prefix axis, and axiom, we see that an axis, we have an imaginary line about which a world or worldview turns. In mathematics, an axiom is something we hold to be true without proof. So in other words, like for example, the identity element, a thing equals itself. 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2. So similarly, values are things we hold to be true without proof. So axiology then, as a branch of philosophy, is and how Nichols has adapted it, is the basic assumptions that a culture operates on and operates on an unconscious level without questioning it. So another way is mimetically so axiologies adapt either by conquest or exposure to a different type of meme. So within Dawson's construct of memes, it's not one meme is good or better, they're successful or not. So you can see axiology in operation in every artifact a culture produces. How culture sees itself, how its members relate to each other in the world, and how they know and understand the world can be said to be its axiology. So for example, an eagle feather staff, an eagle staff in North American, Native Americans, or eagle feather staffs or feather staffs within Indian country throughout all Turtle Island is reflective of the cultural values of that particular native axiology. Tenochtitlan, the ancient pyramid city that's built next to Mexico City, reflects the native culture in its values. It's an artificial pyramid city built on an artificial lake, on an artificial island, on an artificial lake. So think about the technology that created that before Columbus. How many European cities are built on artificial islands in the middle of artificial lakes? So when Cortez first saw Tenochtitlan, he was amazed, because nothing like that in Europe. Nothing. A djembe, the African drum, and Timbuktu in Mali. Not just the city, but the university that's there before the Taliban started destroying it. A sitar, the Indian instrument. An acupuncture needle from China. The Bombay or Mumbai in India, or Beijing. Television monitor reflects a cultural value. Portable computer, cultural value in technology and axiology. Los Angeles, New York, Silicon Valley, all those reflect certain axiologies that are detectable, right? So corporations themselves are a form of technology. Mondragon, for example, Mondragon Corporation is different than 3M or IBM in that Mondragon is a worker-owner-owned cooperative of 170 plus interlocking cooperatives. So there's no capitalist. Everybody who works there is both an employee and an owner, which is different than 3M or IBM, which are basically corporately structured by capitalists. Mondragon's also capitalist, but the owners are distributed throughout the organization. And there's no hierarchy. You can't have the top paid person cannot be paid more than 3 times the lowest paid person. And the top paid person in that organization is like a medical doctor who is not running the company. That's being done by somebody else, cooperative with somebody else. Educational systems and pedagogy, that is how you teach and what you teach, are a form of technology. LCC is different than Timbuktu, the University of Sankore, or Luxor, all the last three being in Africa, traditional African universities and educational systems. All of these reflect certain cultural values. So, for example, within the core value and the highest value, the view of time, logic, epistemology, and process. So, for example, the African. We'll start there. This is an African-American class. So let's start with urban. The philosophy of complementary opposites and union of the higher and lower self. Sema, yoga. So when you heard me say that yoga originated in Africa, this is where I'm talking about where it originated. Sema Tawi, the union of two lands, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, the union of Heru and Set. Now, Heru, basically this is the religion of Netarianism. The Neters were basically embodiment of spirit. So it's as if God is in creation and creation is part of God. So if you wanted to know God, you have to know thyself, which is basically one of the core philosophical values within Luxor. They're actually inscribed above temples. Know thyself. Now you have two selves, two parts of yourself. Your higher self and your lower self. And so Heru on the left, you know him as Horus, and you notice the color of both of them. Okay, so these are black Africans creating this philosophy 10,000 years ago, basically saying that, look, God is in nature, nature is in God, they're the same. How do you know God? You have to control yourself. How do you control yourself? You control your breath. So, each one has a foot on the lungs. That's what that structure is. And that other structure that is rising from the lungs is your esophagus. So it's acknowledging that you have a certain, how you control, you want to control your breath, control your mind, you need to control your breath. Right? And the way you do that, so Horus is or Heru, Horus is his Greek name, that's where we get the name hero, overcomes or strives with Set. Now Set kind of looks like an aardvark, but it's actually a creature that doesn't exist. Set is basically the lower self. And Set becomes what Yeshua, you know him by his Greek name Jesus, refers to as Satana. Satana in Aramaic means adversary or the one who distracts us from the unity. So the union of complementary opposites, diunitologic, where opposites meet and blend. So Heru conquers Set through the control of the breath. In fact, when you see how this works through control of the breath, you are able to, the higher self is being able to control the lower self through the breath. So as an example, the image above, where the Horus is another rendition, the concept of reuniting Heru and Set. The divinities representing virtue, Heru, and vice, Set, actually make peace and in so doing foment a sema, or a union. They tie the lotus and papyrus plants, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, higher and lower self. In the same manner, the aspirant, that's you, who wants to overcome the vices, needs to engender a movement towards virtue. This allows the personality to be purified and the lower nature is subdued, and then the true essential being, Heru, emerges shining brightly to illuminate the individual and all who come into contact with him or her. So through the breath, you gain control over the vices and emerge shining. And so this image here, Heru is, emerging through control of the breath. Heru, the hero, Horus, is emerging and the shadow self, or set, recedes. So if you're going to render this in Christian terms, the original translation basically is talking about, get thee behind me, Satana. Instead of the English translation, get thee behind me, Satan. Because Yeshua being from Judaism, Jews don't believe in a devil or a hell. So what is Satana? Basically, Satan is a mistranslation of Satana, and then they created a whole story about an evil archangel and all that kind of stuff. And in the Jewish religion, they don't believe in an archangel that's more powerful or as powerful as God. That's a sacrilege. The evil does exist, but it's in the human ego, Satana. That which literally means that adversary, or that which distracts us from the unity. And the word for God is Allah, or one word for God is Allah, which means sacred unity, everything. So, get thee behind me, Satana. So through breath control, through controlling the breath, Heru, the hero, the heroine, basically makes Satana recede into the background. The higher self overcomes and controls the lower self. So they're union. So this is achieved through the breath. You yoke the breath to control the mind, heart, the energies of life, and your relationship to the rest of life. Spiritual, then, is your energetic relationship to the rest of the universe, which you are part of. The real test of spirituality is, do you act as if you're part of everything else, and that your acts have consequences? So that's part of what the definition of evil is. You act as if you're not connected, and that your acts don't have any consequences with anybody else. Or do you act as if you're not connected and you don't care what the consequences are? That would be evil. So good is acting as if you're connected and your acts have consequences, and you act for the positive consequences for all. Or evil is acting as if there are no consequences and you act to hurt others to your own advantage. So every time Yeshua is quoted in King James Version of the Bible as saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's actually saying in Aramaic, Ena, Ena, which means I and I. That is, I and you. I and God. I and all of us simultaneously. Ena, Ena. I and I. So Allah is the sacred unity, the one before whom there are no others. Allah and Alat. So Allah, that Al is the, La is nothingness, out of nothingness, the nothingness, Allah, and Alat. Lat is the manifest. So Alat is a moon goddess whose symbol is a crescent moon and a star. She was worshipped at the Kaaba at Mecca, which used to have 100 aspects of the goddess on it until the patriarch Abraham came along and erased the sacred names of the goddess, and it was replaced with the 99 beautiful names of Allah. So there were 99 names of the moon goddess, or the goddess, the feminine, sacred feminine, at the Kaaba, erased by the patriarch Abraham about 5,000 years ago, and then replaced in Islam with the wazifas, the 99 beautiful names of Allah. So Allah, 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 Allah and Alat, Mashika Tawe, in Aztec, all my relations, Mataquiasin, in Lakota, which means all my relations. Is that right? Yes, okay. So, parable of the swimming pool. So Romanized, what I call weaponized Christianity, is like a swimming pool. Heavily chlorinated so that everything immersed in it becomes bleached. And it came out of a westernized Euro-American context. Christianity is an African religion, so it got changed once it got into Europe. So within Romanized Christianity, you can become skilled at swimming laps or wading in the shallows. or doing water aerobics, you may shampoo the chlorine out of your hair once you're out of the pool, but the pool of Western Christianity is not the Ethiopian Ocean, the Sea of Galilee, or the River Jordan that Christianity sprang from. That is natural bodies of water that evolved in a relationship with a natural African world. So swimming pools are useful for developing skills with water, but to surf, to scuba dive, to walk on water, you need experience with a deeper ocean, and you best know how to keep your head above water. So when you first enter natural bodies, it's a shock. Water is a shock. So all this stuff is a shock. Christianity is an African religion. Yeshua was an African with an African senses of humor, wisdom, passion, conviction, and courage, which he held to his last words on the cross, the words of which Western Christianity still does not use. Eli, Eli, let's see, for this I was kept. Lemana Shabachthani, for this I was kept. So we need to reclaim our personal practices in their original form, or as close to the original form as we can manage. So I'm going to end it here. So for example, the Peshitta, not King James Version, Aramaic, not English or Latin, the original axiologies of those particular things. So we'll continue this more in 2 days. Go well, stay well.
Lane Online. Learn, unlearn,